What if I told you that the most dangerous places you'll ever visit aren't on any map? They have no addresses, no warning signs, no security guards. Yet they can trap you for years, decades, even a lifetime. I spent 3 years lost in one of these places, convinced I was helping others when I was actually disappearing. And the most terrifying part, I had no idea I was there. Carl Jung discovered that the human psyche creates its own geography, territories of the mind where we wander, sometimes without ever finding our way home. In his work on individuation, Jung warned that before we can become whole, we must navigate what he called the dissolution of the persona, the breaking down of who we think we are to discover who we actually are. But during this journey, there are places the psyche goes that are so seductive, so seemingly safe, that we mistake them for destinations rather than detours. Jung believed that consciousness itself could become monarchic, trapped in rigid patterns that feel like safety but are actually psychological prisons. Today, we're going to explore 6 of these places. Not the dangerous people Jung warned about, but the dangerous territories within your own mind. Places where time stops, where growth ends, where the soul goes to hide from its own potential. Because as Jung discovered through his own psychological descent, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. But first, you have to recognize when you're in the cave. Are you ready to map the dangerous geography of your own psyche? Then follow me into the territories Jung knew could either trap you forever or become the very places where you find your way home. Picture yourself entering a magnificent hall. The walls are mirrors, but these aren't ordinary reflections. Every surface shows you exactly as you want to be seen. Brilliant, understood, validated. And from somewhere in the distance, you hear the sound of approval. Always approval. This is the echo chamber of endless validation. The most seductive prison Jung never explicitly named, but understood perfectly. In his work on psychological types, Jung wrote that the persona is what someone is not, but what he and others think he is. The echo chamber is where the persona goes to hide from growth. You know you're here when every conversation feels like an interview you're acing, when your social media becomes a carefully curated museum of your best self, when you find yourself drawn only to people, books, podcasts that tell you what you already believe. But Jung understood something crucial about validation. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. In the echo chamber, there is no irritation, no friction, no challenge, only the dangerous comfort of being right. The people in this place speak in quotes that sound profound, but say nothing new. They mistake agreement for wisdom. They confuse being heard with being understood. I've watched brilliant minds waste years in this chamber, becoming experts at explaining why they're right, rather than exploring how they might be wrong. Jung believed that true individuation requires what he called the tension of opposites. The echo chamber teaches you to fear this tension, but the gift it's hiding is your capacity for genuine dialogue, the ability to be changed by what you encounter. Active imagination, deliberately seeking out perspectives that disturb your comfort. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But you cannot become who you are by only hearing echoes of who you think you are. The exit door appears when you ask yourself, when was the last time someone changed my mind about something important? If the answer is, I can't remember, you're deeper in the chamber than you think. But there's another place the psyche goes that's even more dangerous because it feels like healing. You walk through gates that creak with the weight of time. This cemetery holds no bodies, only possibilities. Headstones marking dreams that were buried before they could breathe. Each grave bears an epitaph. Here lies the musician I never became. Here rests the courage I never found. Welcome to the graveyard of unlived dreams. Jung called this psychological territory the unlived life, and he considered it one of the most devastating forms of self-betrayal. In his letters, Jung wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. This place isn't just personal, it's generational. It's where dreams go to become ghosts that haunt families for decades. You know you're here when you catch yourself saying, 'I used to want to,' followed by a reason that sounds responsible, but feels hollow. When you scroll through others living the life you abandoned and feel that familiar sting, not quite envy, not quite grief, something colder. The inhabitants of this place are master storytellers of their own limitations. They speak fluently about why things didn't work out, why it's too late, why they're being realistic. They've become archaeologists of their own abandoned selves." But Jung understood something profound about this territory. What you resist persists. The dreams you bury don't decompose, they fossilize. And fossilized dreams become complexes, autonomous parts of the psyche that unconsciously sabotage new possibilities. I've seen people spend decades tending these graves, bringing fresh flowers of regret every anniversary of what might have been. They mistake mourning for healing. They confuse acceptance with abandonment. Jung believed that every complex contains not just wound, but also undeveloped potential. The graveyard teaches you that death is final, but the gift it's hiding is resurrection. The understanding that no dream truly dies, it only transforms. What he called the transcendent function. The ability to hold both the dream and its apparent impossibility in consciousness simultaneously, until a third way emerges. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But sometimes, who you are includes who you never got to become. The exit appears when you stop visiting graves and start planting seeds. When you ask not, 'Why didn't this happen?' but, 'What is this dream trying to become now?' Because there's a place even more treacherous than buried dreams. A place where you're fully alive, but completely hidden." The curtain never falls here. The audience never goes home. Every word is scripted, every gesture rehearsed, every emotion measured for maximum effect. You've forgotten there was ever a time when you weren't performing. This is the theater of perfect performance. Jung called it living entirely within the persona, and he warned it was one of the most sophisticated forms of psychological imprisonment. In The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, Jung wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, a kind of mask designed to make a definite impression upon others while concealing the true nature of the individual. But in this theater, the mask has become permanent, surgical. You can no longer remove it because you've forgotten there's a face underneath. You know you're trapped on this stage when vulnerability feels like a costume malfunction. When you rehearse conversations before having them. When your biggest fear isn't failure, it's being seen without your lines memorized. The performers here are virtuosos of appropriateness. They know exactly what to say at funerals, exactly how to act at promotions, exactly which emotions are acceptable in which contexts. They've become living algorithms of social expectation. I've watched people spend entire relationships performing their idea of love rather than feeling it. Careers built on performing competence they've never allowed themselves to develop. Friendships that are actually elaborate collaboration performances where no one is home. Jung understood that this theater creates what he called the provisional life, existing in the waiting room of your own existence, rehearsing for a life that never arrives. The most insidious part? The audience rewards the performance. They applaud the consistency, the reliability, the predictability. They never ask to meet the actor behind the character. Jung believed the persona served a crucial function. It protects the vulnerable self while allowing social connection. The theater teaches you that performance is survival, But the gift it's hiding is authentic presence, the terrifying and liberating experience of being seen without a script, what he called the dissolution of the persona. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial. It means learning to move fluidly between performance and presence. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, but you have to know the difference between who you are and who you perform." The exit door appears when you risk a moment of unscripted truth, when you let someone see you forget your lines, when you discover that authenticity isn't the opposite of performance. It's the choice to perform yourself. But there's a place where people go to avoid even having to perform. You entered this place thinking you were rescuing someone. Now every step you take to help pulls you deeper into emotional soil that isn't yours. You can feel yourself disappearing, but you tell yourself, this is love. This is what good people do. Welcome to the quicksand of others' emotions. Jung warned about this territory when he wrote about what happens when psychological boundaries dissolve, when you become infected by someone else's unconscious. In his work on psychological contagion, Jung observed, the unconscious of one person can completely invade another, without either being aware of the fact. This isn't metaphor. This is literal psychological infiltration. You know you're trapped here when you wake up feeling emotions you can't trace to your own experience. When someone else's anxiety becomes your homework. When you feel guilty for feeling good while they feel bad. When their healing becomes more important than your wholeness. The inhabitants of this place are empaths who forgot they need boundaries, not just sensitivity. Helpers who've become emotionally enmeshed with those they're trying to save. People who've confused absorbing pain with healing it. I've watched extraordinary healers, therapists, and friends disappear into this quicksand, believing that drowning in someone else's darkness somehow brings them light. They mistake emotional fusion for deep connection. They confuse enabling with empowering. Jung understood that this territory creates what he called psychological symbiosis. Two people functioning as one unstable emotional unit. Neither can be healthy while the other remains unwell. Yet neither can heal, because their energy is trapped in maintaining the dysfunction. The most dangerous aspect, the person whose emotions you are carrying, often becomes dependent on your carrying them. You become their external emotional regulation system, and they become your purpose. It's a feedback loop that can last decades. You feel responsible for feelings that aren't yours. You feel selfish for wanting emotional autonomy. You feel cold for needing space to feel your own feelings. Jung believed that true compassion requires what he called holding the tension of the opposites. The quicksand teaches you that love means absorption, but the gift it's hiding is compassionate detachment. The ability to care deeply without becoming emotionally infected. Individuation through conscious relationship. Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation requires two separate substances. If they merge, there's no reaction, only dissolution. The exit appears when you learn to feel with someone without feeling for them. When you discover that the most loving thing you can do is remain yourself while they find themselves. When you understand that emotional boundaries aren't walls, they're the space where real intimacy becomes possible. But there's a place even more treacherous, where emotions don't overwhelm you because you've frozen them entirely. Everything here is perfectly preserved, crystalline, clean, controlled. Emotions trapped in ice like prehistoric insects in amber, visible but unreachable, intact but lifeless. The temperature is always the same, just cold enough to prevent decay, just warm enough to prevent death. This is the ice cave of frozen feelings. Jung called this psychological territory the provisional life, existing in a state of perpetual postponement of emotional experience. In his exploration of psychological types, Jung wrote, "The stronger the repression, the more explosive the shadow becomes. But in this cave, you've discovered something more sophisticated than repression. Cryogenic preservation. You know you're trapped here, when you pride yourself on never losing control, when you describe traumatic events like you're reading a weather report, when people compliment your strength, but you feel nothing when they say it, when you can analyze your emotions with surgical precision, but cannot feel them with human warmth. The inhabitants of this place are masters of emotional archaeology. They can explain exactly why they feel nothing about their childhood, their divorce, their loneliness. They've become curators of their own emotional museum, everything labeled, cataloged, safely behind glass. I've met people who can tell you the precise psychological mechanism behind their trauma, but cannot tell you how it feels to be them, who know more about attachment theory than attachment itself, who've studied grief instead of grieving. Jung understood that this cave represents a sophisticated defense against what he called the numinous experience. Those moments when the divine, terrifying, transformative power of feeling threatens to overwhelm the ego's need for control. But here's what Jung discovered. Nothing can be healed that isn't first acknowledged. In the ice cave, acknowledgement replaces experience. Understanding substitutes for feeling. Knowledge becomes a beautiful, elaborate way of avoiding wisdom. The most heartbreaking aspect? You can see your emotions perfectly through the ice. They're preserved, complete, waiting. But the temperature required to keep them frozen also makes them untouchable. You feel proud of your emotional stability while starving for emotional nourishment. You feel superior to emotional people while envying their aliveness. You feel safe in your control while dying of emotional hypothermia. Jung believed that feeling and thinking were equally valuable psychological functions. The ice cave teaches you that feeling is dangerous, but the gift it's hiding is integration. The understanding that emotions aren't threats to intelligence, they're intelligence of a different kind. What he called the transcendent function, the ability to allow thinking and feeling to inform each other rather than compete. Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." The exit appears when you're willing to let something melt, when you stop studying your pain and start feeling it, when you discover that emotional intelligence isn't managing feelings, it's experiencing them consciously. But of all these dangerous places, there's one final territory that combines elements of them all, a place where you don't just visit, but where you become the architect of psychological prisons for others. You didn't mean to build this place. It started as service, as helping, as being needed. But somewhere along the way, you became the center of a complex emotional ecosystem where others' energy flows toward you like rivers toward the sea. You've become a factory that processes human attention, care, and emotional labor. This is the factory of emotional extraction. Jung never named this place directly, but he understood its mechanism when he wrote about what happens when the helper becomes psychologically dependent on being needed. In his analysis of the helper archetype, Jung warned, "The good is always the enemy of the better." Sometimes the desire to be good becomes a sophisticated way of avoiding the harder work of being whole. You know you've built this factory when people seek you out for emotional processing, but rarely for joy. When your calendar is full of other people's crises, but empty of your own dreams. When you feel guilty for having needs, because you're supposed to be the one who meets them. When your identity depends on other people's dependence on you. The workers in this factory are unconscious. They don't realize they're feeding a system. They come to you drained. You process their pain. They leave lighter, and you're left holding the residue. They call you strong, wise, helpful. They never ask what you need, because you've taught them you don't need anything. I've watched people build entire careers, relationships, and self-concepts around being the person others turn to in crisis. They mistake being needed for being loved. They confuse emotional labor with emotional intimacy. They become addicted to the feeling of importance that comes from being indispensable. Jung understood this as a shadow expression of what he called the wounded healer. When your own unhealed wounds create an unconscious need to keep others wounded enough to need you. The most insidious part? You genuinely help people. The factory produces real value, but it's powered by your life force, and it never shuts down for maintenance. You feel selfish for wanting reciprocal relationships. You feel guilty for having problems because you're supposed to solve them. You feel empty after giving so much of yourself away, but you don't know how to receive. Jung believed that true healing creates independence, not dependence. The factory teaches you that your value comes from what you give, but the gift it's hiding is sustainable service, the understanding that you can only give from overflow, not from emptiness. Conscious reciprocity. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But being who you are includes being someone who has needs, limits, and the right to receive care. The exit appears when you start teaching people to fish instead of becoming their permanent fish supplier. When you discover that the deepest service comes from modeling wholeness, not managing brokenness. When you realize that boundaries aren't barriers to love, they're what makes sustainable love possible." But now we come to the most important question of all. You've now seen the map of these 6 dangerous territories. But Jung discovered something that changes everything. We don't just visit these places, we create them. For others. The echo chamber you escape from. Have you built one for someone else by only telling them what they want to hear? The graveyard of unlived dreams you fear. Have you buried someone else's possibilities with your realistic advice? The theater of perfect performance you recognize. Have you demanded flawless performance from those you love? Jung called this the projection of the shadow. We see clearly the psychological prisons we've escaped, but remain blind to the ones we construct for others. As Jung wrote in his most penetrating insight, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the reverse is equally true. Everything we've healed in ourselves, we have the power to help others heal. The 6 places aren't just personal geography, they're collective human territory. And Jung believed that consciousness itself evolves through individuals who do the work of integration. Each place you've learned to exit becomes a place you can help others escape. Each gift you've unwrapped from your own shadow becomes a gift you can help others discover. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not just becoming whole yourself, but becoming conscious enough to stop unconsciously wounding others with your unintegrated pieces. The most profound question isn't, which of these places have I been trapped in? The question is, which of these places am I unconsciously creating for others? Because in the end, we're all cartographers of the human psyche. The maps we draw in our own consciousness become the territories others learn to navigate. Jung's final teaching was this: the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. But being who you are isn't a destination. It's a daily choice to remain conscious in unconscious territory. To exit the dangerous places in your own psyche, so you stop building them in the world. Which place calls to you most urgently? And more importantly, which one are you ready to stop creating for others? Share your insights below. Your awareness might be the map someone else needs to find their way home.